The fluorescent lights above my hospital bed hummed with the same relentless frequency as my racing heartbeat. Each buzz felt like a countdown, marking the seconds until everything in my pathetic excuse for a life would inevitably collapse. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils, mixing with the metallic taste of fear that had been coating my tongue for the past 3 hours. My hands trembled as I clutched the crumpled phone bill notice, the final warning before disconnection. $237. It might as well have been $2 million. The number blurred through my tears as I stared at it, my vision swimming from exhaustion and the medication they'd pumped into me after the accident. The accident. Even thinking about it made my ribs ache where the seatbelt had dug in, where the steering wheel had pressed against my rounded belly when that drunk driver slammed into my ancient Honda. 28 weeks pregnant, alone, and now facing medical bills that would bury me deeper than I already was. I could hear other patients down the hallway, crying babies, worried families discussing treatment plans with voices full of hope and financial security. Everything I didn't have. The thin hospital gown felt like tissue paper against my skin, offering no protection against the cold reality of my situation. My fingers found my phone, the screen cracked from the impact but still functional. I needed to call someone, anyone, who might help. My sister lived 3 states away with her own family to worry about. My parents had made their position clear when I'd shown up pregnant and unmarried. I was on my own. But there was Marcus's old phone, the one he'd left behind when he vanished 2 months ago with whatever cash I'd managed to save. I remembered him mentioning something about a contact, someone who could help with money troubles. Desperately, I scrolled through his contacts, looking for anything that seemed promising. There, a number listed simply as V. No name, no context, but it was the only lead I had. My thumb hovered over the call button. What did I have to lose? Pride? I'd lost that months ago when I started showing and couldn't hide the truth anymore. The dial tone echoed in my ear once, twice. On the 3rd ring, a voice answered. Deep, controlled, with an accent that suggested expensive cigars and even more expensive suits. You're either very brave or very stupid, calling this number. The voice sent shivers down my spine, but desperation overrode caution. Please, I need help. I'm pregnant and in the hospital, and I don't have anyone else to call. Marcus gave me this number and said, Marcus? The temperature in his voice dropped several degrees. Marcus Rodriguez? Yes, he was my boyfriend. He said you might be able to help with money if... A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the distant sounds of hospital machinery. When he spoke again, there was something different in his tone, something that made my blood run cold. Where are you? I shouldn't have told him. Every instinct screamed at me to hang up, but the mounting pile of medical bills and the growing life inside me made the decision for me. St. Catherine's Hospital, room 314. Don't move. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. What had I just done? Who was this man? And why had Marcus's name affected him so dramatically? The air in the room seemed thicker now, charged with an energy I couldn't identify. 20 minutes passed in agonizing silence before I heard them. Footsteps in the hallway. Not the soft-soled shoes of nurses or the casual stride of visitors. These were different. Purposeful. Expensive leather against linoleum, accompanied by the subtle rustle of fine fabric. The door opened without a knock. He filled the doorframe like a storm cloud, all dark suit and darker eyes. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through black hair that was styled with a kind of precision that cost more than my rent. But it was his presence that truly overwhelmed the small hospital room. An aura of controlled danger that made the air itself seem to bend around him. Behind him stood 2 other men, equally well-dressed but clearly subordinates. They remained in the hallway while he stepped inside, his gaze finding me with laser precision. You called me, he said simply, and I recognized the voice from the phone immediately. Up close, I could see the expensive watch on his wrist, catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something woodsy and exclusive that probably cost more than I made in a month. His eyes swept over me, taking in the hospital gown, the IV line, the way I unconsciously placed a protective hand over my belly. I'm sorry. I think there was a misunderstanding. I just needed... Marcus Rodriguez stole from me. His voice was quiet, but there was steel beneath the silk. A significant amount. 3 months ago. My world tilted. What? You're carrying his child. It wasn't a question, and something in his tone made my breath catch. The way he looked at my rounded belly wasn't casual curiosity. It was something deeper, more complex. I didn't know, I whispered. About any of it. He left 2 months ago. I haven't seen him since. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He moved closer to the bed, and I caught more of his scent. Expensive, masculine, dangerous. What's your name? Elena. Elena Morrison. Elena. He repeated it like he was tasting the syllables. You have no family? No one else to call? The question felt loaded, and I found myself shrinking back into the pillows. No, just me. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of what might have been calculation, or perhaps something else entirely. He reached into his jacket and I tensed, but he only withdrew a phone. A few quick words in what sounded like Italian, too low for me to catch. The bills, he said, pocketing the phone. Medical expenses, everything. It's handled. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. What? Your debt? It no longer exists. The room spun around me. I don't understand. Why would you? Because that child you're carrying is Marcus's responsibility, and Marcus's debts are now mine to collect. His dark eyes held mine. Consider this an investment. Before I could process what that meant, he was moving toward the door. But he paused at the threshold, turning back with an expression I couldn't read. Rest, Elena. You'll need your strength. And then he was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of expensive cologne and the sudden, terrifying realization that my life had just taken a turn into territory I couldn't begin to navigate. The nurse who came to check my vitals an hour later seemed confused by the changes in my chart. All pending charges had been mysteriously cleared, and I'd been moved to a private room with amenities I couldn't have afforded in my wildest dreams. As I lay in the new bed, surrounded by comfort I hadn't asked for, one thought echoed through my mind. What exactly had I just gotten myself into? The private room felt like stepping into a different world, one where people like me didn't belong. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city skyline. Plush chairs replaced the standard plastic hospital furniture, and the bathroom was larger than my entire studio apartment. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that money could buy, and the silence was broken only by the soft hum of what I assumed was a very expensive air filtration system. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, those dark eyes that seemed to see straight through me, the way he'd moved with predatory grace, the casual authority in his voice when he'd erased my debt with a phone call. The memory sent shivers through me, a confusing mix of fear and something else I didn't want to examine too closely. A soft knock interrupted my spiraling thoughts. I expected another nurse, but instead, a woman in an elegant pantsuit entered, carrying what looked like designer shopping bags. She was perhaps 40, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested she was accustomed to expensive things. Miss Morrison? I'm Catherine Rossi. Mr. Volkov asked me to bring you some things. Volkov. So that was his name. It suited him. Harsh consonants and hidden depths. I don't need anything, I started. But she was already laying out clothes on the chair. Not just any clothes. Soft cashmere sweaters, silk blouses, perfectly tailored pants with discreet elastic waistbands designed for pregnant women. Everything looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. Mr. Volkov was quite specific about your comfort, Catherine said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He'll be by later to check on you. The doctor says you'll be discharged tomorrow morning. I can't accept these things. I don't even know who he is, really. What he expects in return. Catherine's smile faltered slightly. Mr. Volkov doesn't expect anything you're not willing to give, Miss Morrison. But he does protect what he considers his. The words sent ice through my veins. His? I'm not. The baby you're carrying belongs to a man who wronged him. That makes you significant to his interests. She smoothed invisible wrinkles from one of the sweaters. I'd suggest you don't fight this too hard. Viktor Volkov isn't a man who accepts refusal gracefully. Viktor. Another piece of the puzzle that was my mysterious benefactor. As Catherine left, I found myself staring at the clothes, my mind reeling. What had Marcus done, exactly? And why did I feel like I'd just been claimed by something far more dangerous than I could handle? The rest of the morning passed in a blur of medical examinations and discharge paperwork that I didn't have to sign. Apparently, everything had been handled by Mr. Volkov's people. My doctor, Dr. Hayes, seemed both impressed and slightly nervous about my sudden change in circumstances. Your new guardian has arranged for the finest prenatal care in the city, he said, adjusting his glasses. Dr. Marianne Cross will be taking over your case. She usually only treats celebrities and very wealthy clients. Guardian? The word stuck in my throat. Well, I'm not sure what else to call him. He's covered all your medical expenses, both past and future, and arranged for a car to take you home. Dr. Hayes glanced at his clipboard. He also left instructions that you're to have complete bed rest for the next week, with daily check-ins from a private nurse. By the time I was wheeled to the hospital entrance that afternoon, my head was spinning with the unreality of it all. The car waiting for me wasn't a taxi or an Uber. It was a sleek black Mercedes with tinted windows and a driver in a crisp suit who tipped his cap when he saw me. Miss Morrison, I'm James. Mr. Volkov sent me to take you home. The ride through the city felt surreal. I watched familiar streets pass by through bulletproof glass, because of course it was bulletproof. While sitting on leather seats that probably cost more than my car had been worth, James drove with the kind of awareness that suggested he was more than just a chauffeur, his eyes constantly checking mirrors, taking routes that seemed designed to avoid main thoroughfares. When we pulled up in front of my building, I felt embarrassment wash over me. The peeling paint on the exterior walls, the broken buzzer system, the general air of decay. It all looked so much worse from inside a luxury vehicle. I can manage from here, I said, reaching for the door handle. I'm afraid I need to see you safely inside, Miss Morrison. Mr. Volkov's orders. My apartment on the 3rd floor had never looked so small or shabby. James took in the cramped space, the second-hand furniture, the water stain on the ceiling, without any visible reaction. But I saw him make a mental note of the broken lock on the fire escape window, the way the front door frame was slightly warped. Mr. Volkov will want to know about security, he said carefully. This building isn't adequate. It's what I can afford, I snapped, then immediately felt guilty. None of this was James's fault. Mr. Volkov anticipated this. He's asked me to give you this. James handed me an envelope, thick and cream-colored. He'll be in touch soon. After he left, I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Inside was a key, heavy, modern, expensive-looking, and an address written in bold, masculine handwriting. There was also a note. Elena, your current living situation is unacceptable for someone carrying Marcus's child. The attached address is a secure apartment, fully furnished, with appropriate medical facilities nearby. You'll find everything you need has been provided. This is not a request. I sank onto my threadbare couch, the note trembling in my hands. He was trying to move me, control where I lived, what I did. The rational part of my brain screamed that this was exactly how dangerous men isolated their victims. But the other part, the part that was tired of struggling, tired of being afraid, whispered that maybe having someone powerful enough to solve my problems wasn't entirely terrible. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the building seemed amplified. Footsteps in the hallway, doors slamming, the couple next door fighting as usual. But now, instead of just being annoying, these sounds felt threatening. What if Marcus had enemies besides Victor? What if word got out that I was connected to whatever he'd done? Around 2 a.m, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of my front door handle being tested. Slowly, carefully, as if someone was checking whether it was locked. I held my breath, my hand instinctively moving to my belly. The sound came again, followed by what sounded like whispered voices in the hallway. My ancient building had thin walls, but I'd never heard voices this late, this quiet, this purposeful. My phone was across the room on the kitchen counter. I started to move toward it when I heard the distinct sound of someone working on the lock. The scratching, metallic noise was unmistakable. Someone was trying to pick their way into my apartment. Panic flooded my system. I grabbed the baseball bat Marcus had left behind, one of the few useful things he'd abandoned, and crept toward the window. The fire escape James had noted as a security weakness was also my only exit route, if whoever was at my door managed to get in. The lock clicking open was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Elena Morrison? The voice was unfamiliar, rough with an accent I couldn't place. "We know you're in there, sweetheart. We just want to talk about your boyfriend." Ex-boyfriend. I wanted to scream, but terror had stolen my voice. I heard footsteps entering my apartment. At least 2 sets, maybe 3. "Marcus owes some very bad people money," another voice said, this one closer to my bedroom door. "We heard he left you with something valuable. A little insurance policy, you might say. The baby." They were talking about my baby. "Now, we know Volkov thinks he's claimed you. But see, Marcus owed us first. That makes you our business until his debt is settled." I was pressed against the fire escape window, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the latch. The window hadn't been opened in years, and the paint had sealed it shut. I pulled desperately at the frame while listening to them move through my apartment. Searching. "She's not in the living room. Check the bedroom." The window suddenly gave way with a loud screech of metal on metal. I didn't hesitate. I climbed through onto the fire escape, my pregnant belly making the movement awkward and terrifying. The metal was cold against my bare feet, and the October night air cut through my thin pajamas like knives. I was fumbling with my phone, trying to dial 911, when I heard them discover the open window. But instead of pursuit, I heard something unexpected, the sound of my front door being kicked in from the outside, followed by shouts, gunshots, and what sounded like a small war erupting in my apartment. Through the chaos, I heard a voice that made my knees weak with relief and terror in equal measure. "Where is she?" Victor's voice cut through the noise like a blade, cold and deadly. "We were just—" The sound that followed was cut off by what might have been a fist connecting with flesh. Hard. I asked where she is. "The fire escape," someone gasped. "She went out the fire escape." Within seconds, Victor appeared at the window, his expensive suit somehow still immaculate, despite what sounded like a massacre happening behind him. His dark eyes found mine immediately, and I saw something in them that made my breath catch. Fury so pure and focused, it was like looking into the heart of a storm. "Elena." He didn't raise his voice, but I heard him perfectly despite being 3 floors up on the fire escape. "Come down." "I can't," I whispered, though somehow I knew he heard me. "I'm scared." "You're safe now." He climbed through the window with fluid grace, and I realized he was right. The sounds from inside my apartment had stopped completely. No one will ever threaten you again. He moved up the fire escape toward me with the same predatory grace I'd noticed at the hospital, and I found myself pressed against the railing with nowhere to go. But when he reached me, instead of the aggression I expected, his hands were gentle as they framed my face. "You're freezing." His voice was soft now, intimate in a way that made my pulse race for entirely different reasons. "And you're shaking. People broke into my apartment. They wanted to hurt my baby." "They'll never hurt anyone again," he said. And something in his tone made me certain he meant it literally. His hands moved to my shoulders, then down my arms, checking for injuries with clinical efficiency. "You're coming with me tonight. No arguments." For once, I didn't have the strength to fight. "The address you gave me?" "Yes. It's time you saw what proper protection looks like." He helped me down the fire escape with surprising gentleness, his hands steady and sure as he guided me past each ladder. When we reached the second-floor window, Mrs. Chen's apartment, she was peeking through her curtains with wide, frightened eyes. "Everything is fine now," Victor told her calmly. "There may be some police questions, but you saw nothing." "Understood." Mrs. Chen nodded rapidly and disappeared from the window. By the time we reached the ground floor, there were 3 black cars waiting in the alley behind my building. Victor's men moved with silent efficiency, some going into the building, others taking positions around the cars. I noticed that James was among them, his chauffeur's cap replaced with what looked like tactical gear. "The police," I started. "We'll find a burglary gone wrong," Victor said, opening the door to the middle car. 3 career criminals with extensive records. Very sad. Very final. I should have been horrified by the implication. Instead, all I felt was relief that the men who'd threatened my baby were no longer a problem. What did that say about me? The ride across the city took us through neighborhoods that grew progressively more expensive, until we were gliding through streets lined with the kind of buildings that had doormen and private security. The apartment Victor brought me to was in a converted pre-war mansion, all brick and limestone with the kind of architectural details that spoke of old money and older power. The elevator required a key to access the top floor, and when the doors opened, I stepped directly into what could only be described as a penthouse that had been designed by someone with unlimited resources and exquisite taste. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the interior was a study in luxury. Hardwood floors that gleamed like mirrors, furniture that belonged in museums, artwork that I was fairly certain was original rather than reproduction. But despite the opulence, everything felt strangely warm, lived in, rather than simply expensive. "The master suite is through there," Victor said, gesturing toward a hallway. "Everything you need has been provided. Catherine will be by tomorrow to help you settle in." I turned to face him, suddenly aware that we were alone for the first time since that moment in the hospital room. "Why are you doing this?" "Because Marcus took something from me, and I always collect what's owed." His dark eyes held mine. "But also because you called me. In your desperation, your fear. You reached out to me. That makes you mine to protect. I'm not a thing to be owned." "No," he agreed, moving closer. "You're something far more precious. You're carrying a piece of the puzzle I need to solve. But more than that," he reached out to touch my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone with surprising gentleness. "You're Elena, and I find myself interested in your well-being." The way he said my name, the heat in his eyes, the careful way he touched me, it all made my pulse race in ways that had nothing to do with fear. This was dangerous territory, and I knew it. "I should thank you," I managed. "For tonight, for saving me." "You can thank me by staying safe, by letting me take care of you and the baby." His hand moved from my face to rest lightly on my rounded belly, and I felt the child inside me respond with a flutter of movement. "By trusting me." Trust. Such a simple word for something so complicated. But as I stood there in his impossibly beautiful apartment, surrounded by luxury I'd never dreamed of, protected by a man whose mere presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure, I realized that trust might be the only currency I had left to spend. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll try." Something shifted in his expression. Satisfaction, perhaps, or something deeper. "Good. Rest now, Elena. Tomorrow we begin the real work of keeping you safe." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Victor?" He paused at the elevator, looking back with raised eyebrows. "What exactly did Marcus steal from you?" For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, a smile that was more predator than man curved his lips. "Everything that mattered to me at the time. But I'm beginning to think he may have led me to something far more valuable in return." The elevator doors closed behind him, leaving me alone with luxury I didn't understand, protection I hadn't asked for, and the growing certainty that Viktor Volkov was going to change my life in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. 3 days in Viktor's penthouse apartment had given me time to understand just how thoroughly my life had been transformed. The marble bathroom was larger than my old apartment's living room. The walk-in closet contained an entire wardrobe in my exact size. All designer maternity wear in colors that somehow perfectly complemented my complexion, and the kitchen was stocked with organic foods I'd only ever seen in expensive grocery stores I couldn't afford to shop in. But it was the small details that truly drove home the extent of Viktor's control over my new reality. Fresh flowers appeared daily, arranged by invisible hands. The temperature was always perfect. My prenatal vitamins sat beside crystal glasses that were refilled with fresh water every few hours. Even my phone had been replaced with a new model. Encrypted, Victor had explained, for security purposes. I spent most of my time by the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city spread out below like a living map of the world I'd been lifted from. From this height, my old neighborhood was invisible, lost somewhere in the urban sprawl that seemed both distant and foreign now. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if my previous life had been real, or just some extended nightmare I was finally waking up from. Catherine had become a daily visitor, bringing everything from imported tea to books about pregnancy to what she claimed were essential items for the nursery that was apparently being prepared in one of the spare bedrooms. She was efficient, professional, and completely impenetrable when it came to answering any meaningful questions about Victor or what he expected from me. "Mr. Volkov wants you to be comfortable," was her standard response to any inquiry beyond the purely practical. "Your health and the baby's well-being are his primary concerns." But I knew there was more to it. Men like Victor Volkov, and I was beginning to understand exactly what kind of man he was, didn't spend the kind of money he was spending without expecting something in return. The question that kept me awake at night was what, exactly, that something might be. The answer began to reveal itself on Thursday evening. I was curled up on the impossibly plush sofa, wearing one of the silk nightgowns that had appeared in my closet, reading a pregnancy book Catherine had brought, when I heard the elevator. The sound of those doors opening always made my heart race, a Pavlovian response I'd developed to Victor's presence. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't alone. Victor emerged from the elevator with 2 other men, all 3 of them dressed in the kind of expensive suits that suggested important business. One was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to power. The other was closer to Victor's age, but where Victor radiated controlled danger, this man seemed to vibrate with barely contained violence. "Elena," Victor said, and I heard the subtle shift in his voice that suggested he was performing for his guests. "I'd like you to meet some associates." I stood carefully, suddenly aware of how intimate my clothing was, how domestic this scene must appear. Victor's dark eyes swept over me with an expression I couldn't read, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes when he noticed my nervousness. "This is Dmitry Kozlov," Victor said, indicating the older man, "and Alexei Petrov." Both men nodded politely, but I could feel their assessment of me, the calculations happening behind their eyes. I was being evaluated, measured against some standard I didn't understand. "Please sit," Victor said. But it wasn't really a suggestion. "We have some business to discuss, and it concerns you." I lowered myself back onto the sofa, my hands instinctively moving to protect my belly. The 3 men arranged themselves around the living area with the kind of territorial awareness that suggested this was more than a casual visit. "Elena," Victor began, his voice carrying the same controlled authority I'd heard him use with his subordinates. "These gentlemen represent certain interests that were affected by Marcus's actions." Dmitry leaned forward slightly, his pale blue eyes fixed on me. "Your boyfriend stole from us, Miss Morrison. A substantial amount of money, along with information that was meant to remain private." "Ex-boyfriend," I corrected automatically, then immediately wished I'd stayed silent when all 3 men smiled with what might have been amusement. "Ex-boyfriend," Dmitry repeated. "Yes, I understand he abandoned you when things became complicated. Men like Marcus Rodriguez rarely display loyalty when their actions have consequences." "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "Everything." Alexei spoke for the first time, his accent thicker than the others, his voice rough with what sounded like old cigarettes and hard living. "Marcus stole from the Bratva, from our family. In our world, debts are inherited, especially when they involve betrayal." The Bratva. Russian organized crime. I'd heard the term in movies, but sitting in Victor's elegant living room, surrounded by these dangerous men, the reality hit me like a physical blow. "I don't have any money," I said weakly. "I'm barely surviving as it is." "No," Victor said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "But you have something else, something Marcus left behind." All 3 men looked pointedly at my rounded belly. "You're talking about my baby," I whispered. "Marcus's baby," Dmitry corrected. "A Rodriguez heir. In our world, family lines matter. Bloodlines carry both honor and debt." I felt the world tilt around me. "You want to hurt my child because of what Marcus did? Hurt?" Victor's voice was sharp. "No one wants to hurt the child, Elena. But the debt must be settled. Marcus owes us $5 million in information that cost us significantly more. $5 million. The number was so impossibly large that my mind couldn't process it. "I don't understand what you expect me to do about that." Victor moved to sit beside me on the sofa, close enough that I could smell his cologne, feel the heat radiating from his body. There are several options, he said carefully. The most traditional would be for the child to work off the debt once he or she comes of age. 20 years of service to the organization. Perhaps 30, depending on the agreed terms. The room spun around me. You're talking about enslaving my child. We're talking about honor, Alexei said harshly. About family responsibility. In Russia, when a man dies owing debts, his children inherit the obligation. Marcus isn't dead, I protested. He might as well be, Dmitri said with grim satisfaction. We haven't been able to locate him in over 2 months. Men who steal from us and then disappear rarely resurface voluntarily. Victor's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with my trembling ones. But there is another option, he said quietly. A more civilized solution. I looked at him, desperate for anything that would protect my child from the nightmare scenario they'd outlined. Marriage, Victor said simply. The word hung in the air between us like a weapon. I don't understand. If you marry into a family with sufficient resources and influence, Dmitri explained, a family capable of settling Marcus's debt, then the child would be protected. The debt would become your new family's responsibility, and they would have the means to resolve it. I stared at Victor, beginning to understand. You're talking about yourself. I'm talking about a solution that protects everyone's interests, Victor said. Your child grows up safe and secure, with access to the best education, the finest opportunities. Marcus's debt is settled through legitimate business channels. Everyone wins. Everyone except me, I said, pulling my hand free from his. You're talking about buying me, trading my freedom for my child's safety. Victor's eyes darkened. I'm talking about offering you more than you could ever hope to achieve on your own. Look around you, Elena. Look at how you're living now, compared to 3 days ago. This apartment, the clothes, the medical care. This is what protection looks like. This is what ownership looks like, I countered, standing up despite my shaking legs. You're no different from Marcus. You just have better suits and more money. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dmitri and Alexei exchanged glances, and I realized I'd just insulted Victor in front of his peers, something that probably wasn't done lightly in their world. But Victor's reaction wasn't the explosion of anger I expected. Instead, he stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled, and walked to the window overlooking the city. Alexei, Dmitri, he said without turning around, we'll continue this discussion later. Both men stood immediately, recognizing the dismissal, but Dmitri paused at the elevator, looking back at me with something that might have been pity. Miss Morrison, he said formally, in our world, there are very few happy endings. Victor is offering you the closest thing to one that exists. I suggest you consider that before your pride makes the decision for you. The elevator doors closed behind them, leaving Victor and me alone with the weight of what had just been discussed. He remained at the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid with tension. You think I'm no different from Marcus, he said finally, aren't you? You're both trying to control my life for your own benefit. He turned then, and I saw something in his expression that made my breath catch. Marcus abandoned you when you needed him most, left you pregnant and penniless to face the consequences of his actions alone. I am offering you security, protection, a future for your child that most people could only dream of. In exchange for what? My freedom? My right to choose? In exchange for becoming my wife, he said, moving closer. In exchange for sharing my name, my protection, my resources. In exchange for letting me care for you and your child the way you deserve to be cared for, because you want to control me. Because I want to keep you safe. He was standing in front of me now, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Because the alternative is watching you struggle in poverty while dangerous people hunt you down for debts you didn't incur. Because the thought of anyone hurting you makes me want to burn the world down. The intensity in his voice, the way he was looking at me, it sent heat racing through my body in ways that terrified me. This wasn't just about business or debt or obligation. There was something else here, something deeper and more dangerous than financial arrangements. You don't know me, I whispered. You don't care about me. I'm just a problem to be solved. Aren't you? But there was no coldness in the question, no dismissal. Instead, his hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. When I walked into that hospital room 3 days ago, you were just Marcus's pregnant girlfriend. A complication in a debt collection. But now what? Now I find myself thinking about you every hour of every day, wondering what you're reading, what you're thinking about, whether you're comfortable, whether you're happy. I find myself making excuses to come home early just to see you. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. That doesn't mean anything. That's just possessiveness. Is it? His other hand settled on my waist, and I could feel the heat of his palm through the thin silk of my nightgown. When I think about other men looking at you the way I'm looking at you right now, I want to commit violence. When I imagine you in danger, or scared, or alone, something inside me breaks. Is that possessiveness, Elena, or something else? I wanted to step back, to put distance between us, but my body seemed to have other ideas. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, drawn to the warmth and strength he represented. "You're trying to seduce me into agreeing to this," I accused, but my voice came out breathless. "I'm trying to show you that this doesn't have to be just a business arrangement." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm trying to show you that I can be more than just your protector." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere between that first phone call and this moment, you stopped being just Marcus's problem and became mine to treasure." His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his breath warm against my lips. "I'm saying that marrying you wouldn't be a sacrifice I'm making for business purposes. It would be the smartest thing I've ever done." The kiss, when it came, was nothing like I'd expected. There was no force, no demand for submission. Instead, it was gentle, questioning, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't want to pull away. I wanted to lose myself in the heat and safety, an impossible luxury of being wanted by someone powerful enough to remake my entire world. When we finally broke apart, I was breathing hard, my hands somehow tangled in the expensive fabric of his shirt. "This is crazy," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed, his thumb tracing my swollen lips. "But crazy doesn't mean wrong. I don't love you. You don't hate me either." His smile was soft, almost tender. "Love can grow, Elena. But respect, attraction, compatibility, those things can be built on, and we have something more valuable than love." "What's that?" "Need. You need my protection, my resources, my ability to keep you and your child safe." And he paused, as if the admission cost him something. "I need you to let me be the man who provides those things." Before I could respond, my phone, the new encrypted one he'd given me, buzzed with an incoming call. Victor frowned, checking the display. "Dr. Cross," he said, handing me the phone. "Your obstetrician," I answered, expecting a routine check-in about my appointment the next day, but Dr. Cross's voice was tight with concern. "Elena, I need you to come in immediately. There's something in your blood work that requires urgent attention." The world seemed to stop. What kind of something? I'd prefer to discuss it in person, but there are indicators that suggest you may have been exposed to something toxic. "We need to run more comprehensive tests and possibly begin treatment immediately." Victor was watching me with sharp attention, clearly reading the fear in my expression. "Toxic?" I repeated. "I don't understand. I haven't been anywhere dangerous, haven't eaten anything unusual." "When did you last see Marcus Rodriguez?" Dr. Cross asked. The question hit me like ice water. "About 2 months ago." "Why?" "Because the compounds we're seeing in your system are consistent with certain types of industrial poisoning. The kind that might occur if someone were exposed to chemicals used in drug manufacturing or weapons production." Victor's hand was suddenly on my back, steady and warm, but I could feel the tension in his touch. "Dr. Cross," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Is my baby? We don't know yet. That's why I need to see you immediately." "How soon can you get here?" I looked at Victor, seeing my fear reflected in his dark eyes. "We'll be there in 20 minutes, he said, taking the phone from my trembling hands. As he spoke with the doctor, arranging security and transportation, I sank back onto the sofa, my hands pressed against my belly. Marcus hadn't just stolen money and information. He'd left me with something that might poison my child before he or she ever had a chance to be born. When Victor ended the call, he immediately pulled out his own phone, speaking rapid Russian to someone on the other end. But I barely heard him. All I could think about was the possibility that my baby, this innocent life I'd already begun to love so desperately, might be paying the price for Marcus's crimes. Elena. Victor's voice cut through my panic. Look at me. I raised my eyes to his, seeing steel and determination where I'd expected sympathy. Whatever is happening, whatever Marcus exposed you to, we will fix it. I have the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, unlimited resources. Your baby will be fine. You don't know that. I know that I will not let anything happen to either of you. He knelt in front of me, his hands covering mine. But this changes things, Elena. This proves that Marcus's actions have consequences that go far beyond money or information. You're not just connected to his debt anymore. You're a victim of his choices. I understood what he was saying. The poisoning, if that's what it was, gave him even more leverage. More reasons why I needed his protection, his resources, his name. The marriage offer, I said quietly, is now more urgent than ever. He stood, already moving toward the elevator. Get dressed. We're going to the hospital, and then we're going to make some very important decisions about your future. As I watched him pace while waiting for the elevator, I realized that whatever choice I thought I had in this situation had just disappeared. Marcus had made sure of that, even in his absence. The question now wasn't whether I would accept Victor's protection. It was whether I would do it willingly, or be forced into it by circumstances beyond my control. Either way, I was beginning to understand that Viktor Volkov was about to become the most important person in my life, whether I wanted him to be or not. The medical center Victor took me to looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Located in the most exclusive part of the city, it catered to people who expected privacy, discretion, and the kind of care that money couldn't just buy. It had to be inherited or earned through connections most people would never have. Marianne Cross was exactly what I'd expected from someone who treated celebrities and billionaires. Impeccably dressed, surgically precise in her movements, and expensive enough that her consultation fee probably exceeded my former monthly rent. But there was genuine concern in her eyes as she reviewed my test results, and that worried me more than anything. The good news, she said, settling behind her mahogany desk, while Victor and I sat in chairs that probably cost more than my old car, is that the levels we're detecting aren't immediately life-threatening. The bad news is that they're consistent with prolonged exposure to methylenedioxymethamphetamine compounds, industrial-grade chemicals used in certain types of drug manufacturing. MDMA? Victor's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus was cooking drugs? Not just cooking them, Doctor. Cross replied, consulting her notes. Based on the specific compounds and their concentrations, Elena was living in, or frequently visiting, an environment where these chemicals were being processed on a large scale. The exposure was chronic, low level, but over time. What does that mean for the baby? I interrupted, my hand instinctively protecting my belly. Dr. Cross's expression softened slightly. We don't know yet. The good news is that you're in your second trimester, so major organ development is largely complete. But we need to begin immediate chelation therapy to remove these toxins from your system, and we'll need to monitor the baby's development very closely. Chelation therapy? The medical terminology felt foreign and frightening. It's a process where we introduce compounds into your bloodstream that bind to the toxic metals and chemicals, allowing your body to eliminate them safely. It's intensive, requiring daily treatments for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer. Victor leaned forward. What are the risks? To Elena, minimal. The medications we'll use are safe during pregnancy and actually protective for the fetus, but the process is exhausting, and she'll need complete rest and monitoring throughout. And if we don't do it? Dr. Cross hesitated. The toxins could affect fetal brain development, cause premature labor, or lead to other complications we can't predict. Elena, how long were you living with Marcus in his current residence? The question hit me like a physical blow. About 8 months. We moved in together when I found out I was pregnant. And during that time, did you notice any unusual smells? Chemical odors that seemed out of place? I thought back to Marcus's apartment. Our apartment, I'd thought at the time. There had been smells, particularly in the basement storage area that Marcus had claimed was off-limits because of plumbing issues. Sweet, acrid scents that made my head ache when I was downstairs doing laundry. "The basement," I whispered. "He said I shouldn't go down there because of the pipes, but sometimes the smell would come up through the vents." Victor's jaw was tight with controlled fury. He was running a lab in the building where you were living, where you were carrying his child. "It appears so," Dr. Cross confirmed. "Elena, I need to ask, are you still in contact with Marcus? Do you know where he might be now?" "No. He disappeared about 2 months ago. I haven't heard from him since." "That timing is significant," Victor said grimly. 2 months ago was when he stole from us. He must have realized the lab was compromised and decided to run. Dr. Cross looked between us with professional discretion, clearly understanding that there were aspects to this situation she didn't want to know about. "Regardless of the circumstances that led to the exposure, our priority now is Elena's health and the baby's safety. I'd like to start the first chelation treatment today, and I'll need Elena to remain here for observation for at least the next 48 hours. Here, I looked around the luxurious office. "This place has inpatient facilities?" "Our most private wing," Dr. Cross confirmed. "Given the sensitivity of the situation, Mr. Volkov has arranged for complete discretion. No one will know you're here except essential medical staff." As Dr. Cross began explaining the treatment process, I found my mind wandering to the larger implications of what we'd discovered. Marcus hadn't just stolen money and information. He'd been manufacturing drugs, probably supplying some very dangerous people. And he'd exposed my unborn child to industrial toxins in the process. But more than that, he'd left me as collateral damage in a war I hadn't even known was being fought. "Elena," Victor's voice brought me back to the present. "Dr. Cross is asking about your family medical history. I provided what information I could, but my thoughts kept circling back to the same terrifying realization. Without Victor's intervention, I never would have discovered the poisoning until it was too late. I would have continued living in ignorance while toxins damaged my child. Probably would have given birth to a baby with developmental problems that doctors would have attributed to genetics or bad luck. The first chelation treatment felt like liquid fire moving through my veins. Dr. Cross had warned me it would be uncomfortable, but the burning sensation was accompanied by nausea so severe I could barely keep down the antiemetic medications they gave me. Victor stayed beside my bed throughout the entire process, his hand holding mine while nurses monitored my vital signs and adjusted IV drips with practiced efficiency. When the nausea became overwhelming, he held my hair back while I was sick into a basin that cost more than most people's monthly salary. "This is because of Marcus," I gasped between waves of illness. "All of this. The debt, the poisoning, the danger. Everything traces back to him." "Yes," Victor said simply. He didn't try to sugarcoat it or offer false comfort. "But that doesn't matter now. What matters is making sure you and the baby survive this." "Why?" The question came out more desperate than I'd intended. "Why do you care so much? Really? It can't just be about the dead anymore." Victor was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of my hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "When I was 12 years old, my mother died because she couldn't afford proper medical care. We had money. My father was already successful in business. But she was too proud to ask for help when she started getting sick. By the time we realized how serious it was, the cancer had spread too far." I looked at him, seeing a vulnerability I hadn't expected. I swore that day that I would never let anyone under my protection suffer, because of pride or poverty or lack of resources. When I saw you in that hospital room, alone and terrified, carrying a child whose father had abandoned you both to face the consequences of his crimes." He shook his head. "I couldn't walk away. I physically could not leave you to face that alone. So this is about your mother? This is about the fact that you called me when you had no one else to turn to? That makes you my responsibility, Elena. But somewhere between that call and now, it became more than responsibility." Before I could ask what he meant, Dr. Cross entered with a tablet full of test results. "The chelation is working faster than I expected. she announced, checking my IV line. Your body is responding very well to the treatment, but I want to talk about long-term care. Long-term? Elena, even after we clear the toxins from your system, you're going to be at higher risk for complications throughout the rest of your pregnancy. You'll need specialized monitoring, nutrition support, stress reduction. Essentially the kind of comprehensive care that requires significant resources and complete lifestyle changes. Victor leaned forward. What kind of changes? No stress, no physical exertion beyond light walking, optimal nutrition, daily monitoring by medical professionals. She'll need to be in an environment where every aspect of her care can be controlled and optimized. I understood what she was saying. My cramped apartment, my minimum wage job, my complete lack of resources. None of that was compatible with the kind of care my pregnancy now required. There's something else, Dr. Cross continued. Because of the nature of the toxins, there's a possibility that other people Marcus was involved with might want to ensure that no evidence of their activities remains. You're talking about silencing witnesses, Victor said flatly. I'm talking about the fact that Elena's blood work could potentially implicate a lot of very dangerous people in very serious crimes. If word gets out about what we've discovered, she didn't need to finish the sentence. I was no longer just a pregnant woman caught up in her ex-boyfriend's debts. I was a walking piece of evidence that could destroy entire criminal enterprises. They'll try to kill me, I said quietly. They'll try, Victor corrected. But they won't succeed. Over the next 6 hours, as the chelation treatment continued, Victor's phone rang constantly. He stepped out to take most of the calls, but I caught fragments of conversation, discussions about security protocols, safe houses, legal strategies. Each conversation seemed to add another layer to the complex web of protection he was weaving around me. When Dr. Cross came in for the evening assessment, she had news that changed everything. Elena, the toxin levels in your blood are dropping faster than we anticipated, which is excellent. But there's something else. She consulted her tablet. The blood work revealed something we didn't expect to find. My heart stopped. Something wrong with the baby? No, something unusual about the paternity. Victor went very still beside me. I don't understand, I said. Dr. Cross looked uncomfortable. Elena, are you certain Marcus Rodriguez is the father of your child? Of course I'm certain. He's the only person I've been with in over a year. Because the genetic markers we're seeing don't match the profile we have for Marcus Rodriguez in our system. What profile? Victor asked sharply. Mr. Volkov, when you arranged Elena's care, you provided DNA samples for the father to help us understand potential genetic complications from the toxin exposure. But the baby's genetic markers don't match those samples. The room spun around me. That's impossible. Elena. Victor's voice was carefully controlled. Where did those DNA samples come from? Dr. Cross consulted her notes. Hair follicles recovered from the apartment where the chemical exposure occurred. Your security team provided them along with Elena's medical history. Hair follicles from Marcus's apartment, but if the baby wasn't Marcus's, there has to be a mistake, I insisted. I haven't been with anyone else. It's impossible. But even as I said it, memories were surfacing. The night 3 weeks before Marcus disappeared, when I'd come home from work to find him acting strangely, nervous and paranoid. He'd insisted we go out to dinner, somewhere far from the apartment, and we'd ended up at a seedy bar where he'd introduced me to a man he claimed was a business associate. The man had been tall, dark-haired, charming in the way that dangerous men often are. He'd bought us drinks, made jokes, seemed genuinely interested in my pregnancy. Marcus had stepped away to take a phone call, leaving us alone for maybe 20 minutes. I remembered feeling dizzy, remembered the man helping me to the bathroom when I felt nauseous. I remembered him being very kind, very attentive, making sure I got home safely when Marcus had to handle some business. But I didn't remember anything after that, until I woke up the next morning in my own bed, with Marcus already gone and a note saying he had to travel for work. Elena? Victor's voice seemed to come from very far away. What is it? What do you remember? I told them about that night, about the man at the bar, about the missing hours between feeling sick and waking up at home. With each detail, Victor's expression grew darker, more dangerous. Rohypnol, Dr. Cross said grimly. "The symptoms you're describing are consistent with drug-facilitated sexual assault." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying I'm saying that Marcus may have arranged for someone else to ensure that you became pregnant with a child that wasn't his." Victor was on his feet, pacing to the window with barely controlled fury. He needed a pregnant girlfriend. Someone who would appear to be carrying his heir, creating leverage he could use or trade. But why would he do that? "Because," Victor said, turning back to face me with eyes like black ice, "a man's children are considered the most valuable collateral in our world. If Marcus owed money he couldn't pay, a pregnant girlfriend would be worth more than cash to certain people." "People like you?" "People like me," he confirmed. "Elena, I think Marcus arranged for you to become pregnant specifically so he could use you as collateral for his debts." Dr. Cross cleared her throat. "There's one more thing. Based on the genetic markers we're seeing, I may be able to identify the actual father from our database." She worked on her tablet for several minutes while Victor and I sat in stunned silence. When she looked up, her expression was carefully neutral. "Elena, does the name Anton Kozlov mean anything to you?" The blood drained from my face. Kozlov, the same last name as Dmitri, one of Victor's associates who'd visited the apartment. "Anton Kozlov," Victor repeated slowly. "Dmitri's youngest son. You know him?" "I know of him. He's been missing for 3 months. Dmitri assumed he'd been killed by rivals, but if he was working with Marcus, the implications hung in the air between us. Anton Kozlov, son of one of Victor's most important allies, had been used by Marcus to impregnate me as part of some elaborate scheme involving drug manufacturing, stolen money, and shifting loyalties in the Russian criminal underworld. "This changes everything," Victor said finally. "How?" He looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Because you're not carrying Marcus's child, Elena. You're carrying a Kozlov heir. And that makes you infinitely more valuable than even I realized." As the full implications of this discovery settled over me, I realized that whatever danger I'd thought I was in before had just multiplied exponentially. I wasn't just a witness to Marcus's crimes or collateral for his debts. I was carrying the grandchild of one of the most powerful crime bosses in the city, conceived through deception and assault, and now claimed by another crime boss who saw opportunity in my tragedy. The chelation treatment continued through the night, but I barely felt the burn of the medications anymore. All I could think about was the growing certainty that I was trapped in a web of violence and power, that I would never be strong enough to escape on my own. And that Viktor Volkov, for all his promises of protection, might be the most dangerous trap of all. The revelation about Anton Kozlov's paternity changed everything, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of releasing me from Victor's protection, it seemed to bind me to him even more tightly. Within hours of Dr. Cross's discovery, the medical facility had been transformed into what felt like a fortress, with security personnel positioned at every entrance and men in expensive suits having hushed conversations in corridors that suddenly seemed too small to contain the weight of what we'd uncovered. Dmitri Kozlov arrived at sunrise. I watched from my hospital bed as he entered my room with the bearing of a man accustomed to delivering life-changing news. He was followed by Victor and 2 other men I didn't recognize, all of them moving with the careful choreography of people navigating a potentially explosive situation. "Miss Morrison," Dmitri said, his pale blue eyes studying me with new intensity. "I understand congratulations are in order. You're carrying my grandchild." The words should have sounded warm, familial. Instead, they felt like a claim being staked, another chain being forged around my already limited freedom. "I didn't know," I said quietly. "About Anton. About any of it. Marcus drugged me. I never consented to, I know." Dimitri's voice carried surprising gentleness. "Anton was young, foolish, and easily manipulated by men like Marcus Rodriguez. My son thought he was participating in some elaborate seduction, not realizing he was being used as a breeding stud for someone else's scheme." Victor moved closer to my bed, his presence both protective and possessive. "Where is Anton now?" "Dead," Dmitri said flatly. "Marcus killed him 3 weeks after that night at the bar, probably to eliminate the only person who could identify him as the father. We found Anton's body 2 days ago, Buried in a construction site outside the city, the room seemed to contract around me. Another death, another casualty of Marcus's greed and manipulation. A young man I barely remembered who'd been used just as thoroughly as I had been. So, what happens now? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Now, Dimitri said, settling into the chair beside my bed, we discuss the future of my grandchild. Over the next hour, they laid out their plans with the clinical precision of men dividing territory on a map. The baby I was carrying represented more than just a new life. It was a bridge between two powerful families, a symbol of alliance and shared interest that could reshape the balance of power in the city's underworld. Elena will marry Victor as planned, Dimitri announced as if I weren't in the room. The child will carry the Volkov name, ensuring protection and legitimacy, but the Kozlov family will maintain certain interests in the child's upbringing and future. What kind of interests? Victor's voice carried a warning edge. Educational decisions, cultural heritage, preparation for eventual leadership roles within our organizations. The child will be raised knowing both sides of their bloodline. I listened to them discuss my future and my child's destiny like we were assets being allocated in a business merger. The rational part of my mind screamed that I should fight this, should refuse to be bargained over like property. But the exhausted, terrified part of me recognized that resistance would be both futile and potentially fatal. And if I refuse? I asked quietly. Both men looked at me with expressions that mixed surprise with something that might have been pity. Elena, Victor said carefully, you're carrying the heir to two of the most powerful families in this city. Refusing our protection would be unwise. You're talking about making me a prisoner. I'm talking about making you a queen, Dimitri corrected. My grandchild will inherit wealth and power beyond your imagination. You will want for nothing, need nothing, fear nothing. In exchange, you need only accept the security and luxury we're offering. And my freedom? Victor sat on the edge of the bed, his hand finding mine with surprising tenderness. Elena, look at me. I raised my eyes to his, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there during our previous conversations. Do you remember what I told you about my mother? About watching her die because she was too proud to accept help? I nodded. I won't let that happen to you. Not because of business or obligation or family politics, but because somewhere in the last week I've fallen in love with your strength, your courage, your refusal to break no matter how much pressure you're under. The admission hung in the air between us like a bridge across an impossible chasm. You love me, I whispered. I love the woman who called a stranger for help when she had nowhere else to turn. I love the woman who stood up to dangerous men to protect her unborn child. I love the woman who's lying in a hospital bed, poisoned and terrified, and facing an impossible situation, and still asking about freedom instead of begging for safety. Dimitri cleared his throat meaningfully. Victor, perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private. No, Victor said without taking his eyes off mine. Elena deserves to hear this with witnesses. Elena, I'm not asking you to marry me because of business arrangements or family politics or debt collection. I'm asking you to marry me because I can't imagine my life without you in it. But you barely know me. I know that you have more courage than most men I've worked with. I know that you put your child's welfare above your own pride. I know that you make me want to be a better man than I've ever been before. His thumb traced across my knuckles. I know that when I thought those men in your apartment might have hurt you, I was prepared to start a war to avenge you. Victor. I could hear the uncertainty in my own voice, the way I was wavering between the safety he offered and the independence I'd always tried to maintain. I'm not Marcus, he said quietly. I will never abandon you or betray you, or put you in danger for my own benefit. I will spend my life making sure you and our children are safe, happy, and free to be whoever you choose to be. Our children? The baby you're carrying will be mine in every way that matters, Elena. Biology is just genetics. Family is choice, commitment, love. If you'll let me, I'll be the father Anton Kozlov never had the chance to be. Before I could respond, Dr. Cross entered with the day's test results and news that would change everything yet again. Elena, the chelation therapy has been remarkably successful. The toxin levels in your blood are now within normal ranges, and all indicators suggest the baby is healthy and developing normally. She consulted her tablet. However, there's something else we need to discuss. Victor tensed beside me. What is it? The genetic analysis has revealed something unusual. Elena, you're not just carrying Anton Kozlov's child. You're carrying twins. The room went completely silent. Twins? I repeated stupidly. Fraternal twins, which means two separate conceptions. Based on the genetic markers, one child is definitely Anton's. But the other... Dr. Cross hesitated. The other appears to be Marcus Rodriguez's biological child after all. Dmitri stood abruptly. That's impossible. Actually, it's not. It's rare, but superfecundation, conception of twins by different fathers, can occur if a woman has multiple partners within a short time frame. Elena, you mentioned missing time the night you met Anton. Is it possible that you were also intimate with Marcus that same evening, either before or after the encounter you can't remember? I thought back to that horrible night, trying to piece together fragments of memory through the haze of whatever drug I'd been given. There were flashes, coming home from the bar, Marcus seeming agitated and strange, him insisting we needed to celebrate something I didn't understand. I remembered feeling confused, compliant in ways that weren't natural for me. He drugged me twice, I realized aloud, once at the bar to make me compliant with Anton, and then again at home to... I couldn't finish the sentence. To ensure conception by both men. Victor completed grimly. He wanted to cover all his bases. If one pregnancy failed, he'd have backup. If both succeeded, he'd have twice the leverage. Dmitri was pacing now, his controlled demeanor cracking for the first time since I'd met him. This changes the calculations entirely. We're not talking about one heir anymore. We're talking about two children with different bloodlines, different claims, different destinies. No, Victor said firmly. We're talking about Elena's children, both of them, and they will both carry my name and my protection. Victor, be reasonable. A Rodriguez heir will be raised as a Volkov, Victor interrupted. Biology doesn't determine family, Dmitri. Elena is going to be my wife, and these children are going to be my sons or daughters. End of discussion. The argument that followed was conducted in rapid Russian, with both men's voices rising as they debated the political and financial implications of twin heirs with different biological fathers, but I barely heard them. All I could think about was the fact that I was carrying two babies, one conceived through assault, one through manipulation, and both of them innocent of the crimes that had brought them into existence. Stop, I said quietly, but they continued arguing. Stop, I said louder, and both men turned to look at me. These are my children, I said, my hands moving protectively to my belly. Both of them. I don't care about bloodlines or politics or family alliances. They didn't choose to be conceived this way, and they deserve better than to be treated as pawns in your business arrangements. Victor moved back to my bedside immediately. Elena, you're right. I'm sorry. We got caught up in treating me like an incubator and them like property, I finished. I understand that you both have legitimate concerns about their future and their safety, but I won't let them be raised as weapons or symbols or political tools. Dmitri studied me with something that might have been newfound respect. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we find a way to protect them that doesn't rob them of the right to choose their own futures. I'm proposing that any marriage arrangements be based on what's best for the children, not what's most advantageous for your organizations. And what do you think is best for them? Victor asked. I looked at him. This dangerous, powerful man who'd shown me more genuine care in a week than Marcus had in 8 months, and made the decision that would determine the rest of our lives. I think they need a father who will love them unconditionally, regardless of their biology. I think they need security and protection and opportunities that I could never provide alone. And I took a deep breath. I think I'm falling in love with the man who's been willing to start wars to keep me safe. Victor's hand tightened on mine. Elena, I'll marry you, I said. the words coming out stronger than I'd expected. Not because I'm forced to, not because it's the only choice I have, but because you've shown me what real protection looks like. Because you've treated me like someone worth fighting for instead of just another problem to solve. And the children will be Volkov's, I said firmly, looking at Dmitri, with the understanding that they'll learn about their heritage from both sides when they're old enough to understand. But their primary loyalty will be to each other and to the family that raises them with love. Dmitri considered this for a long moment. And if one day they choose to claim their Kozlov heritage, then we'll deal with that when it happens, Victor said, as a family. The old Russian nodded slowly. Very well. But I want regular contact with my grandchild. Holidays, birthdays, cultural education. Agreed, Victor said without hesitation. Over the following weeks, as my health improved and the babies grew stronger, the arrangements were finalized with the kind of efficiency that only unlimited resources could provide. The wedding was scheduled for the day after my discharge from the medical facility, a small private ceremony that would legally bind me to Victor while giving our children the protection of his name and fortune. But the most surprising development was how naturally Victor and I had begun to function as a partnership. He brought me books and flowers, stayed beside my bed through the difficult nights when the collation treatments left me sick and weak, and talked to my growing belly as if the babies were already his own children. You know, I said one evening as he read pregnancy books with the same intensity he probably applied to business contracts. Marcus never once asked me how I was feeling. Marcus was an idiot, Victor replied without looking up from his research on twin pregnancies. He was also the biological father of one of my children. Biology is just science, Elena. Love is choice. He finally looked up at me, his dark eyes serious. I choose these babies. I choose you. Every day, for the rest of our lives, I'll keep choosing you. The wedding took place in the penthouse, with only Dmitri, Catherine, Dr. Cross, and a judge who specialized in discretionary ceremonies for people who valued privacy above publicity. I wore a dress that cost more than my old apartment's annual rent, carried flowers that had been flown in from some impossible place, and promised to love, honor, and cherish a man I'd known for less than a month. But as Victor slipped the ring onto my finger, a platinum band with diamonds that caught the city lights like captured stars, I realized that sometimes love wasn't about time or convenience or perfect circumstances. Sometimes it was about recognizing the person who would stand between you and the entire world, who would choose your safety over his own interests, who would love your children as if they were pieces of his own heart. Elena Volkov, Victor said as the judge pronounced us married, and the name felt like coming home to a place I'd never known I was searching for. 6 months later, I delivered 2 healthy babies in the private medical facility where we'd discovered the truth about their conception. Victor was there for every moment of labor, holding my hand through contractions, whispering encouragement in Russian and English, crying when our son and daughter took their first breaths. "They're perfect," he whispered, holding our daughter while I cradled our son. Absolutely perfect. And they were. Despite everything, the drugs, the toxins, the violence and manipulation that had brought them into existence, they were healthy and strong and completely innocent of their complicated beginning. "What should we name them?" I asked. Victor looked at the babies with an expression of pure wonder. "Hope," he said finally, "because that's what they represent. And Anton, for the father who never got the chance to meet his son." "Hope and Anton Volkov," I repeated, testing the names. "I like it." As I watched my husband, and he was truly my husband now, in every way that mattered, gently rock our daughter while our son slept against my chest, I realized that sometimes the most beautiful things come from the darkest circumstances. Marcus had tried to use me as a pawn in his criminal schemes, but his manipulations had led me to a man who loved me enough to claim children that weren't biologically his, who had built a fortress of protection around our small family, who chose us every single day. "No regrets?" Victor asked quietly, settling into the chair beside my hospital bed with Hope sleeping peacefully in his arms. "None," I said, and meant it completely. "What about you?" "Only one," he said with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I wish I could have found you sooner." Outside our windows, the city stretched endlessly in all directions. The same city where I'd once struggled to pay bills and worried about raising a child alone, but from inside the security of Victor's protection, surrounded by love I'd never expected, and luxury I'd never dreamed of, that old life seemed like something that had happened to someone else entirely. I was Elena Volkov now, wife, mother, and the most protected woman in the city. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood what safety felt like. Our story had begun with a mistaken phone call and a desperate plea for help. It had grown through danger and deception, through revelations that changed everything and choices that defined us. But it had become something neither of us had anticipated. A love story written in the shadows, protected by power, and sealed with the promise that we would face whatever came next as a family. Together.